Welcome everyone, Costine here with some of the best race-specific mods in Total War Warhammer 3. Now, this video is going to be focused on races that do actually need help because they're pretty bad otherwise. So think Dwarves or Empire as just some examples. But let's start with the Dwarves. You do have the Unforgotten Dwarf mod. Now, this seems to be a recent development. There's people reporting crashes or conflicts with plenty of other mods, but there's some really interesting stuff over here that will make the Dwarves much more enjoyable to play. For instance, Ungrim gets a campaign movement range after winning a battle, so he's getting the same kind of benefit as Valkia. Kind of makes sense for him, actually. But on top of that, while he still is focused on Slayers, he actually gets some better benefits for those Slayers. For instance, he gets the Slayer ability, which increases that campaign movement range or goes all the way to 25%. I'm not sure if it's going from 10% to 25 to 15% or just giving you a 25% benefit after winning a battle, probably 25%. Then Slayer King gives you Legend's End, which is basically like Journey's End, but better because it will activate at 50%. And keep in mind, Journey's End is actually bugged. Then you get Dragon Slayer, which gives you bonus versus large and fire resistance for Slayers, and magical attacks for his army. So now you actually have a freaking reason to use the Slayer army as Ungrim, who desperately needed a reason to do so. And then there's a bunch of other changes. I did notice that I actually started with more money in this campaign. The technology tree seems to be relatively unchanged for the most part, but there is another mechanic as well. There is the ability of honoring various gods. Now, as Ungrim, you can only honor Grimnir, but let's say we take a generic Rune Lord, right? He can honor all the three of the major gods. So you can honor Grimnir, Grungni, and honor Valea. Now, Valea will give you 3% casualty replenishment. Might be, we could really benefit from more with respect to that. Now, unfortunately, this mod doesn't seem to fix one of the major issues that the Dwarves do have. And what is that major issue? Their casualty replenishment is freaking awful. Thankfully, there is a mod that does that. And that mod is called Craftable Dwarf Replenishment. This allows you, for 200 of gold, so it's not going to be free, you get the ability of crafting a priest. It's a banner. And I believe it's a banner anyway. And this gives you 14% casualty replenishment. This is such a great utility because with good casualty replenishment, you have a lot more flexibility in your campaign. You can use different unit rosters as opposed to just using, as opposed to just going down the route of quarrelers with great weapons or regular quarrelers. So it is a fantastic mod. These two together actually make the Dwarves a lot better than they are. Now, for the Dwarves, I would strongly recommend also using the public order penalty removal mod because the control really screws over their growth. It's not that they face an issue of rebellions. If you face a rebellion as a Dwarf, you're doing a lot of things really, really badly. But rather, the problem is that poor control severely affects their growth. So removing the public order penalty on high difficulties will be a major benefit in your campaign. Imagine that fixing Dwarves only takes a couple of smaller fixes like this to actually make them a lot more enjoyable than they currently are. Just 2 mods, a couple of bug fixes, nothing too significant. Now, I think the Unforgotten Dwarfs could really benefit from improving the casualty replenishment in a better way, but overall I do like what it's done. And hey, it's early days. There could be a lot more improvements added to the table over there. The next mod on the list is called Devotion from Everything, from all enemies rather. Devotion from all enemies. I'll provide a link in the description. But what this mod does is allows you as Kislev to get devotion from fighting a large array of enemies, with the exception of other Kislevi factions. That's the major exception over here. But this is important for Kislev because they do need a lot of devotion in their campaigns. They need it to invoke the gods. They need it for the special structures in the Kislevite cities themselves. They need it for churches to get patriarchs, and so on. So you do need a lot of devotion in a Kislevite campaign. It's how the campaign is balanced. Now, this wasn't necessarily a problem in the Realms of Chaos, because in Realms of Chaos you were certainly fighting a lot of chaos. But in Immortal Empires, you don't want to fight a lot of chaos. The best thing you can do as Kislev is, yeah, deal with fraud, and just put yourself in Catherine's shoes. Yes, you're going to fight some Norseguns early on, but then you're going to deal with fraud. And he doesn't give any devotion by default, so getting devotion from Fraud or from Vlad, who can also go and conquer the Empire, Ostermark, and then Sylvania for a major economic base, is very important in your campaign. So actually gaining devotion from those enemies, I would say, is a godsend to making Kislevite campaigns a lot better than they are currently. Only a small change, imagine that, just only a small change can have such an enormous impact on a race that desperately needs it. It's not going to fix Castalton or Catherine's campaign issues, it's not going to fix their victory conditions, but hey, you can always play Boris Ursus and endure campaign a lot more if you're playing as him, because you do have a lot more options and flexibility in the campaign with a mod like this. So very highly recommended if you're going to play a campaign as Kislev to get this mod. Moving on to Grand Cathay, the mod is called Perfect Harmony. It's a pretty popular mod. Harmony is a pretty annoying mechanic to deal with in a Cathayan campaign. Now, what this mod does is makes it so that it's impossible in a campaign to just go completely out of the balance zone. Now, I would like a mod that just gave me some flexibility. Like, let's say, for instance, the balance zone requires you to go 3 points one side or another. This mod takes it to an extreme. I don't think there's any mod out there that, say, puts it within 3, 4, 5 points so that you do have some flexibility in your campaign and you're not constantly frustrated by this in your entire campaign. Now, if you do believe this is cheating, fair enough, it kind of is, because starting with these kind of benefits from the beginning of your campaign is very significant. But you could just start your campaign without it, play it until you get to a balanced point, and then simply put, which you probably can within the first 2-3 turns, and then just close the game once you've reached it and play from there with perfect harmony. So you don't have to constantly ping-pong in your entire campaign, and you don't get frustrated when you're confederating another faction and you're getting all their lords and heroes and you're just constantly annoyed at having to build and rebuild settlement buildings or income buildings throughout your empire. Now, harmony isn't a bad mechanic, but the way Creative Assembly implemented it in Warhammer 3 certainly was annoying. On top of that, I would say if you're playing a Cathayan campaign, one of the things you could really benefit from would be a climate mod to allow you more flexibility when it comes to climate, because Cathay does have fairly limited climate. Like, they can't take the mountains. Like, if you could just take the mountains, that would add a lot more flexibility in your campaign. Same with the jungle. Just those two climates alone. That might also be very, very beneficial in a campaign. But perfect harmony will add a lot and make playing a Cathayan campaign a lot less frustrating than it currently is by default. And finally, we get to the Empire. And here we start talking about entire overhauls for the race. I mean, the Dwarf mod that I mentioned earlier, yeah, that can be considered an overhaul, but it's just adding a couple of things here and there. What I'm going to talk about the Empire is a major, significant change for their campaign in a pretty substantial way. There's 2 mods I'd recommend using. Whatever compatibility issues they might have between each other, that's hard for me to say. But the first one is modified Imperial Authority. What this does, the main benefit of this one, is that it gives you a bunch of missions as either Karl Franz or Balthazar Gelt that give you some Imperial Authority. So for instance, you can take Helmgart. That will give you 1 Imperial Authority. If you take Marienburg, that will give you another one. If you take Brasskeep, another one, and so on and so forth. This is great because one of the things a lot of mods ignore is just how miserable the early game can be for certain factions, and they just focus on the mid game and late game and ignore the major issues that come up in the early game. And I want a reason, as Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt, for my campaign plan to not be declaring war on Nuln and harassing them and abusing their settlements and taking advantage of the Imperial authority to get an infinite amount of Imperial authority. And a lot of mods will not do so. This is important. There's also another mod that converts prestige to Imperial authority, though that can be pretty expensive. But I would also recommend that. I don't have it installed here. You may not need it, depends on how you view things. But that's one mod. The next one is Your New Empire. This is a huge overhaul. And what it does is it changes the bar here in terms of Imperial authority and gives you a lot of benefits if you have very high positive Imperial authority. You start getting benefits from 2 to 3. This gives you growth, control, income from old buildings, local recruitment capacity, and you can form defensive and military alliances. And a high chance that elector counts will provide state troopers. Now, there's a lot of working parts in this, but what's important is you now have all of the diplomatic options with various factions available. Though you can only form a military alliance at like 8 fealty, which you don't start with any faction. Like with Gallitude, you start with 7. But at the very least, you will have the ability of forming alliances. And that is pretty damn important. Now, it would be great if you had something like SFO where you can use Imperial Prestige to force alliances for the Prestige tab. For electoral machinations, to force alliances with prestige between factions, because this would improve the defensive ability of the Empire. Because anyone declaring a war, like say, if you force an alliance between Middenheim and Talabayam, that means that any faction declaring war on Midland or Talabayam would have to face both of them at the same time, which could be a very substantial benefit to have. I've only seen that in SFO. If there's a mod that does that, please let me know. There's a lot of mods with regards to Empire and can be difficult to go for all of them. But I don't like SFO. Like, I like that change, but I really, really don't like SFO in a lot of ways. It feels too constricted. Like, if you want to play a slower, very slow campaign, sure. I don't care for slow campaigns. I don't care about campaigns for 100, 200 turns. That's not what I'm interested in. That's probably not what the vast majority of people are interested in, but you see mod after mod after mod about that. If you want to enjoy the grind, that's all on you. So this mod gives you a lot of diplomatic options with factions, but diplomacy is dependent on fealty. So it actually makes prestige more useful. The reason it makes prestige more useful is because having a high level of diplomacy between yourself and a faction will actually improve fealty with a faction. So having good diplomatic relations with another faction will improve that. The downside is, for instance, you can't get the military access pact with Middenheim, which will affect diplomatic relations, which will lower fealty. So it's really a mod focused on like the late game, which is a problem as I see it. Maybe you could start the campaign without it and then install it once you've gotten some things going, because it does feel a bit annoying. But starting with it from the very beginning does have its own advantages, because you'll see the Hunts Marshal, for instance, and this will give you options in your campaign. You'll also see Volkmar over here from the very start over here of this campaign, and you start with trade agreements. Well, both of them. Thank you. Like Volkmar and the Hunts Marshal being in their own little worlds, completely divorced from Karl Franz and the rest of the Empire, never really made sense. Another major change that they made is the way this will work with with state troopers. First off, with respect to this, it's you pay prestige to get them, and you can also get these troopers through vassalization, or if you have a military alliance. But a military alliance requires 8 fealty. So there's a reason to get the high fealty level. There's a reason to get the military alliance. There's a reason for the various elector counts for you to care about the various elector counts instead of just thinking about taking their provincial capital to get these items and these state troopers. And you now pay prestige to get these troopers, and there's a chance for them to be added to the pool, the unit recruitment pool. So it's not cooldown based, it's a chance based. But the chance increases the more your Imperial authority increases. Now, I'm not necessarily completely fond of the way the system is in a mod, but it is a damn sight better than what we have in the base game. It gives you a reason to care about the whole of the Empire instead of your own little realm. It gives you a reason to not just spend the first 20 turns of your campaign besieging Null and taking their territory and selling it to another faction at Iverheim or Gelt, as Karl Franz, for instance. There are reasons given to give a shit instead of abusing that mechanic. Though at the same time, I just asked myself, why wouldn't I do that anyway? Just wondering. Also, actually, the mod does allow you to increase Imperial authority for prestige by default. You don't need a separate mod for that. So it's pretty great. Pretty good options all around with these two mods. Modified Imperial authority as well as your new Empire. Does make it feel like an actual Imperial campaign where you have to engage in diplomacy, where you have to engage in politicking, where you have to worry about the relations between yourself and other elector counts. Pretty sure Boris is going to be pissed off because you're going to tread through his land without access. But then again, do I care? Not really. He's a madman anyway. He's possessed by demons that only exist in his own head. But I would strongly recommend, if you're playing an Imperial campaign, to use something of this nature. Or just install SFO, maybe just play the Empire with SFO. Though SFO or Radius or any of those kind of complete overhauls don't fix these issues. Until Creative Assembly gets off their asses to actually give us a proper rework for the Empire. That's all there is to say. Questine here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. If you do enjoy the content, please consider donating via PayPal. Would be greatly appreciated. Helps keep me going. Stay tuned for more.